Section number 1, Pathogenesis, Pain and Poverty and Suffering and Death. United States political culture has gone mad, quote unquote. Julian Assange, November 2017. Of course, Assange is right here. Of course, Assange is correct here. But what he fails to recognize is that the madness, quote unquote, is not confined to our political culture. Every institution, every aspect of American society is slowly becoming more and more psychotic every day, by the day. The following succinct paragraph, written by Northwestern University Germanist Eric Heller in the 1950s, 10 sentences, 251 words, explains almost all of the problems we have been experiencing in this society since the end of World War II and the passing of the greatest generation. This brief, insignificant appearing paragraph, written in the 1950s, explains in a nutshell many, not all, of the social, political, racial, and ethnic, legal, psychological, moral, and religious problems we are experiencing in this country today. Most of these problems can be understood by its analysis. In the future, universities will have professors paid to analyze, discuss, and teach its meaning and implications for humanity's future, if it has one. Here we go. Eric Heller, Pain and Poverty and Suffering and Death. Where we live, soon nobody will be able to exist, for men become enemies and each his own enemy. From now onward they will hate, however many comforts they will lavish upon themselves, and hate themselves with a new hatred, unconsciously at work in the depths of their souls. True, there will be ever better reformers of society, ever better socialists, and ever better hospitals, and an ever-increasing intolerance of pain and poverty and suffering and death, and an ever more fanatical craving for the greatest happiness of the greatest numbers. Yet the deepest impulse informing their striving will not be love and will not be compassion. Its true source will be the panic-struck determination not to have to ask the question, what is the meaning of our lives? The question which will remind them of the death of God. The uncomfortable question inscribed on the features of those who are uncomfortable, and asked above all by pain and poverty and suffering and death. Rather than allowing that question to be asked, they will do everything to smooth it away from the face of humanity, for they cannot endure it. And yet they will despise themselves for not enduring it, and for their guilt-ridden inability to answer it, and their self-hatred will betray them behind the back of their apparent charity and humanitarian concern. For there, and I get goosebumps when I read this, for there they will assiduously construct the tools for the annihilation of humankind. There will be wars such as have never been waged on earth. Eric Heller, from his book, The Artist's Journey into the Interior. Hellerian nihilism. The term I have created to refer specifically to the concepts presented in this paragraph is Hellerian nihilism, after Eric Heller, a most insightful social observer who combined literary scholarship with psychological introception and extroception in order to make us aware of what is happening to our world. Bad stuff. What is Hellerian nihilism? The inability to witness or even imagine the normal routine pain or suffering or death on the planet, to the point where they are willing to destroy the planet and its environment subconsciously, rather than witness single incidents of pain or suffering or death, which is the norm in our world. This is what Heller means by the phrase, the somersault of self-annihilation. Eric Heller, The Artist's Journey into the Interior. Pain and poverty and suffering and death produced a society-wide or species-wide self-hatred. Humans create or discover narcotics against self-disgust, which I have classified elsewhere as distraction devices, symbolized by pinball from the rock opera Tommy by Peter Townsend and his group The Who. Everything Americans possess in this country, and everything they do, can be seen in one way or another as a distraction device. Any any activity invented, created, or designed unconsciously to distract them from the hatred they feel toward themselves, toward the rest of the species, toward the entire world, and toward life itself. The somersault, these are some of the terms that he describes. The somersault of self-annihilation, tools of man's collective suicide, the new self-hatred, annihilation of humankind, and narcotics against self-disgust. A narcotic against self-disgust, quote-unquote, Eric Heller. We are witnessing the derangement Heller predicted throughout Western civilization. The time is fast approaching. This is a quote from Heller quote from another part of the essay. The time is fast approaching when secular crusaders, tools of man's collective suicide, will devastate the world with the rival claims to compensate for the lost kingdom of God by setting up on earth the ideological rules of love and justice, which, by the very force of the spiritual derangement, will lead to the rules of cruelty and slavery. And the war for global domination will be fought on behalf of philosophical doctrines. This is Hellerian derangement, I call it. Narcotics against self-disgust. Varieties of narcotics in post-mortem America. Business, conspicuous consumption, skateboarding, tightrope walking, the Grand Canyon, base jumping, sex, spring break, parties, orgies, entrepreneurship, pinball, and anything and everything else Americans do when they're not asleep in bed. Almost like a religious experience. Americans abandoned the vision of themselves as part of an interconnected social system, a connection of parents to children and grandchildren and of community to community. And instead, here's the key, turn to the narcissistic pursuit of the self as a source of value, almost like a religious experience. They have done away with God, and yet the report of their own deed has not yet reached them. Eric Heller, Artist Journey into the Interior. Not every symptom of PMA's problems can be attributed to Hellerian nihilism and Hellerian derangement, and its after effects alone. But it is the single most influential factor at work today. Spiritual derangement. All the bizarre ideas and behavior we are witnessing in this country today, all the conflicting notions and contradictory values, are the direct result of the mental, emotional, and spiritual derangement caused by loss of God psychosis announced by Hellerian nihilism. I mean, we see all kinds of nut job behavior in Europe and the United States. Nobody really believes, quote, nobody really believes in anything anymore, and everyone spends his life in frenzied work and frenzied play so as not to face the fact, not to look into the abyss. Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind. And I know for a fact that Alan Bloom was very familiar with the books and works of Eric Heller. He's just ignorant. He doesn't know any better than to tell the truth. That's a quote from the John Wayne character in McClintock. Great Western. Pathological sensitivity to pain in dying nihilist societies. Quote, almost everywhere in Europe today, we find a pathological sensitivity and receptivity to pain, an increase in tenderness that would use religion and philosophical bric-a-brac to deck itself out as something higher. There is a visible cult of suffering, the unmanliness of what is baptized as pity in the circle of such enthusiasts is, I should think, what always meets the eye first. Sympathy for all that's sufferings. What they would like to strive for with all their powers is the universal green pasture happiness of the herd, with security, lack of danger, comfort, and an easier life for everyone. The two songs and doctrines which they repeat most often are equality of rights and sympathy for all that suffers. And suffering itself they take for something that must be abolished. They should be aware that this quote and the immediately previous quote slide were written in the 1880s. But they apply to today even more applicable. E. Alan Pratt on Oswald Spengler on nihilism. Oswald Spengler in Decline of the West, 1926, studied several cultures to confirm that patterns of nihilism were indeed a conspicuous feature of collapsing civilization. In each of the failed cultures he examines, Spengler noticed that centuries-old religious, artistic, and political traditions were weakened and finally toppled by the insidious workings of several distinct nihilist pastures. The Faustian nihilist shatters the ideals. The Apollonian nihilist watches them crumble before his eyes, and the Indian nihilist withdraws from their presence into himself. Western civilization is already in the advanced stages of decay, with all three forms of nihilism working to undermine epistemological authority and ontological grounding. Unquote. Alan Pratt. Oswald Spengler on Democracy, Equality, and Historylessness by Thomas F. Burtnow, 31 May 2012. Universal dread of reality, paralytic in its effects, holds the modern world in its stultifying grip. This pernicious dread invades every consciousness, edits every utterance, political correctness, and persistently prunes back permissible language so as to prevent in advance any articulation of what anyone, stumbling momentarily out of his trance and confronting the world, might see. Oswald Spengler and Faustian Culture, published on the web blog site Faustian Europe on 24 July 2007. Transition from culture to civilization, and this refers back to Spengler's idea that a culture arises, develops, matures, gets old, and then when it dies, it fossilizes, and he calls that civilization. When a culture has evolved into a civilization, that means it's already stopped developing and it's dead. And that means the long slide of decadence to death, decadence unto death, has begun. Transition from culture to civilization includes migration of people from countryside to city, assuring thus their separation from soil, from the experience of natural life. People, instead of experiencing what the real life is, are now separated from it in cities, leading to abstraction from real experience, separated ideas, and thinking. To return to nature, to live in harmony with it, as perhaps Rousseau would have it, is an impossible nonsense. Part of the decay of a culture into a civilization, one of the things that you see is people start to migrate to the cities and out of the country. So they get more and more and more alienated from the natural world, the environment and nature, etc., etc. That's why you see so many people caught up in all this nonsense about it's not nonsense. Global warming is happening and we're correcting it. But they're getting hysterical about it and politicizing it. All right? And those are like reaction formations. Their alienation from the soil has made them hedonists and narcissists. Plastic passivism. The time today prides itself on its pacifism. The truth is that men no longer believe in anything strongly enough to fight for it. That's from Leo Strauss and Joseph Cropsey's great book, History of Political Philosophy, page 837. Kathy, I'm lost, I said, although I knew she was sleeping. I'm empty and aching, and I don't know why. It's Paul Simon, Simon and Garfunkel, the song America. And my answer is, loss of God nihilism is why, of course. We're not going to take it. Now you can't hear me, your ears are truly sealed. You can't speak either, your mouth is filled. You can see nothing, and pinball completes the scene. Here comes Uncle Ernie to guide you to your very own machine. From Tommy by The Who. Now, if you know the album and the song, Uncle Ernie was a child molester. He molested Tommy when he was blind, deaf, and dumb. Dialogue from Syriana, a Middle East spy adventure movie with a message. Set the backstory. Bob, played by George Clooney, is a CIA operative who speaks Farsi, operating in Iran and Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon. Moussaoui, played by Mark Strong, is an Iranian agent. Moussaoui has Bob naked and his hands and legs are duct taped to a heavy wooden chair. He struggles but cannot move at all. His hands are taped down to the armrests of the chair so that the fingers of each of his hands are exposed, but he cannot pull them away. Moussaoui wants names from Bob and is preparing to torture him to get those names. He has a pair of end-cutter pliers and is about to use them to rip Bob's fingernails out one by one. End cutter pliers are a pair of pliers that have a flat head like this. So they'd be perfect for clamping onto like a fingernail and yanking it out. Musawi. Bob, what do you know about torture methods used by the Chinese on the Falun Gong? Method number 1. What's your guess? Water dungeon. Did you guess water dungeon? Number 2 method? Number 2, twisting arm and putting face in feces. Not interested in 2? Number 3. Number 3 is called pulling nails from fingers. What do you think, Bob? Number 3 sound good to you? The purpose is to get the monks or whatever to recant their beliefs. What if I had to get you to recant? That'd be pretty difficult, right? Because if you have no beliefs to recant, then what? Well, then you're fucked is what, Bob. So he's talking about Euro-American nihilism, the fact that we don't believe in anything anymore. And he's Iranian, which is like, in terms of nihilism, they're much further ahead. I mean, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all the monotheistic Abrahamic religions, were designed in nihilism. They are nihilist religions. I talk about this in section 2 of my project, No One Believes in God, and especially section 3, The Better World is Coming to a Theater Near You. They were founded upon the idea that you little people do what we say, or you will never go to that better world off in the sky somewhere after you die. Nihilism equals alienation, equals hedonism, equals decadence, equals narcissism, equals enemy, equals and produces the herd. So when a society becomes nihilistic and starts to decay, you see people alienated from people, you see widespread deep hedonism, of which feminism and homosexuality are 2 examples. You see decadence, which is when you become hedonistic. They're back and forth. Narcissism, enemy, and the herd. This is what we see everywhere. I mean, this is the most nihilist, alienated, hedonistic, decadent, narcissist, enemy-prone, and herd-like society in human history. This values cocktail, as I call it, produces feminism and demand for exaggerated women's rights, tolerance for homosexuality, even encouragement and preference, encouragement of complaints from on the part of historically troublesome racial or ethnic minorities like Jews and Negroes, desire for universal peace and love, hatred toward tradition, that's the left today, hatred towards democracy, that's the left today, hatred for establishment values due to hatred of the framers and founders as dead white men, attempts to cancel out the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the system, whatever that term might mean to the herd. All the other many trappings of left-wing liberal loonyism or loonism. My torture is that I perceive these things more clearly than any human being who has ever existed on this planet. So I'm like, everywhere I go, I see this shit, and nobody else sees it. I'm alone, and it tortures me. The pentangle of nihilism. Nihilism, hedonism, narcissism, alienation, decadence. I tried to make a little diagram with each of those on the points of the pentagram, but I couldn't figure out how to do it in Microsoft Office. Nihilism itself becomes a mental/philosophical disorder and morphs into other mental disorders. The triangle of nihilism, hedonism, narcissism, and alienation are intertwined together. They all are self-producing. They all produce each other and perpetuate each other further. Death of God repercussions. Repercussions of the death of God. Nihilism, narcissism, hedonism, etc. Nihilist developments and after effects since Heller. Hellerian nihilism. Loss of God nihilism has led to loss of God traumatization, or nihilist, what I call nihilist trauma/nihilist traumatization, which has in turn led to loss of God psychosis, which is a form of what Heller refers to as spiritual derangement. 4. Please love me nihilism. 5. Snopes nihilism, also known as what I refer to as money nihilism, which can be witnessed throughout the country, particularly on Wall Street and in corporate America. But everywhere you look, it's happening too. I analyze this further in my fourth or fifth section on the American people are corrupt, not the politicians or the corporations. Everywhere you look, most people in the country are scheming for two things. They're trying to get unearned money and material possessions any way they can, and they're scheming to get everyone else to whatever extent they can. You know, it's like, that's why there's so much hate and rage. That's why the society is exploding with all this hate and all this nonsense, right? Because when you're nihilistically pursuing money and graft and all this shit, everybody else in the society is a potential competitor. So if you can get something on these competitors, they will retard their ability to challenge and compete with you for goodies. When nihilism invades the collective psyche of a population, it splits like an atom into similar and dreadful phenomena. Nihilism. When nihilism invades the human system, that system or person becomes increasingly robotic. That's what people are today, and the public schools have assisted this, because people can't think for themselves anymore. They can't think at all. They can't make decisions. They don't have fluid, they don't have what psychologists call integrative complexity or tolerance for ambiguity, which are both essential variables of the creative mind. And people who can think at all, the ability to see an issue from multiple sides, to see how other people view the issue, even if they don't agree with your view of the issue, okay? This displays itself in two ways. There's more ways, but I just come up with this for the moment. They become more passionless and thoughtless, like drone pilots in the military, alienated from their targets. That's why they killed 2 terrorists and then 15 or 20 women and children in the process. And it doesn't bother them. They become malignant narcissists who believe that what they are doing is right, simply because they are doing it. And this applies to anything they do, including self-contradictory acts. And an example I give in parentheses here is G. Gordon Liddy. If you remember back from Watergate. Nihilism is real. The effects of nihilism are real too. Nihilism is a real spiritual disorder with terrible social, political, economic, moral, religious, and psychological consequences for contemporary humans. We are witnessing these consequences throughout this society today. Our nihilism is real. Our nihilism is not some ivory tower theoretical construct that can be ignored, or some esoteric theological blather or babble. I see it at work everywhere in post-mortem American society, and every person I observe every minute of the day. It has attached itself to every brain cell of every American, not to mention every Euro-American. Why you are a nihilist? Confusion about what the word itself literally means. Confusion between morality and legality of a society, resulting in nihilism. Morality is not a list of do's and don'ts. See, that's why Judaism and Christianity and Islam are decadent religions, okay? Because they confused the law with the moral code. And part of the reason is that these religions developed in society where that was the state religion. And contrary to what Americans believe, state religions are not only positive things, they're necessary for a healthy society. In Rome, they had a state religion, which were the pantheon of Greek gods. But other religions, including weird, whacked out cults, were tolerated. It's like, you want to do that off in your quarter somewhere, you do it. As long as you, in public, you show respect for the gods of the society. Confusion between morality and legality. We the Jews were the first one to do this, okay? Because the law, the 613 laws that God handed to Moshe Rabbeinu, like 5,000 years ago or whatever, and the thousands upon thousands of pages of both Talmuds elaborating upon these laws. Okay? We made morality into a list of do's and don'ts to counter our resentment towards Rome and Europe in general. Morality is a healthy morality is a prescription for a kind of person, according to the culture of the society they are operating in. Some cultures strive to produce citizens who are completely honest, say, for example, the American founders and framers of revolutionary America. Some cultures value a person morally who is a good liar. That's Arab culture, because Arab culture was founded on war and conquering. And if you're negotiating with your enemy and you can lie well, you can trick them maybe and defeat them that way. It's one way. When you're a martial society, when you're a military cult society, which I have no problem with, I treasure them, you're looking for every means to conquer your opponent. Some cultures value above all prowess in personal combat. For example, every culture except us. Some cultures value above all a person who can joust well. Say, for example, King Arthur's Britain. And jousting is not a joke here. It's serious, because when they jousted, they were expressing their physical courage, their toughness and determination, and their faith in God, because they believed that God was involved in the joust, and that if you challenge someone because they lied, God will enable you to defeat them. So it was part of their faith. Some cultures, in King Arthur's Britain, it's supposedly still transitioning between pagan Celtic cults and the one God of Christo-Judaism. Some cultures value creating persons who are helpless, weak, and conformist, for example, post-modern American society. Judaism and Christianity corrupted and perverted the concept of morality, and now we don't even have that definition for people to cease to believe in. Excuse me, I gotta turn Rachmaninoff down. Come on, Rocky. Rachmaninoff is cheesy so often. Icons of nihilism. We witness today a new form of religious communion, techno-toys. I watch people on the subway communing with their little lecking devices. Members of the herd have successfully refocused their God cathexis to material objects. They exhibit a religious, worshipful relationship with their toys. I gotta get out of Rachmaninoff and turn to Wagner. Why you are a nihilist? Confusion/conflation between morality of a society and laws of a society. Morality is not a list of do's and don'ts. This is what a legal system is about. Morality is a prescription for a kind of person. Judaism and Christianity corrupted/perverted the concept of morality, and now we don't even have that moral code to cease believing in. It made it easy for people to cease to believe in it. Narcissism, its privileges and pleasures, compensates for nihilism, hedonism, and the rest follows soon after. Nihilism, a viewpoint that traditional values and beliefs are unfounded and that existence is senseless and useless, absurd. A doctrine that denies any objective ground of truth and especially of moral truths. A doctrine or belief that conditions in the social organization are so bad as to make destruction desirable for its own sake, independent of any constructive program or possibility. The program of the 19th century Russian Party, advocating revolutionary reform and using terrorism and assassination. All these guys like Bakunin and all these guys. Loss of God nihilism. The loss of God, the loss of morality, and its effect on the American and European head. Loss of God nihilism has produced what I call nihilist trauma, which in turn has resulted in loss of God psychosis, what I call loss of God psychosis. These are all my terminology, new terms. And accompanying spiritual derangement. Societal self-annihilation. It is my contention, it is my observation, it is my certification that our civilization, including our current society, is engaged in and is in the grip of a fundamental project of self-annihilation. New Yorkers slash postmodern Americans, arrow, 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 on Subway are perfect examples of what I call slave ache. Everywhere I look in this country, I see slave ache. They hate slave ache. Part of slave ache is that they hate themselves because they're not rich and famous and therefore important in the world. The subway makes people feel their unimportance very directly and intimately, up close and personal and right in your face. Rich people don't have to ride the subway, so you never see them, unless it's someone making a joke about the homeless, like Mayor Bloomberg. I think that Bloomberg was being a narcissistic, megalomaniacal asshole when he would ride the subway with his team of armed bodyguards, right? Everybody knows he's only doing it on occasion. He doesn't have to do it most of the time, and didn't do it most of the time when he was in office. They hate. Does he ride the subway now? He's not running for re-election, although I think he's going to step in to the Democratic race for Democrat nomination, because this is the worst field of Democratic potential nominees in the history of the country. People with slave ache, they hate everyone around them for being nobodies and no ones and nothings, just like them. Each hates the other for being a near-perfect imitation and reflection of himself and his predicament of nothingness and his no-onehood. Each member of the herd hates himself for being a member of the herd, hates every other individual member of the herd for being just like him. When you hate yourself, you hate other people who are like you, who remind you of you. God. American self-hate. Evidence of the American self-hatred epidemic. Look closely at the lyrics of any Nirvana song. What's the existential piece? What's the subtext? It's not, life is not worth living, although that would be a close approximation. It's very specifically, my life is not worth living. You know, Kurt Cobain used to go on in interviews about how he won't have children, you shouldn't bring children into this horrible world. I mean, the world is not horrible. He felt horrible about himself and projected it anthropomorphically onto the universe. My life is not worth living. Note, at a cafe last week, I met a kid waiting tables. On his left arm's inside wrist, he had a tattoo of a barcode, about 6 inches long and 1.5 inches wide. That same week, I met a girl tending bar at another cafe. Actually, both of them were the French Roast. But the first time I was at the French Roast up on the Upper West Side, and the second time, or the girl, I was at the French Roast on 6th Avenue and 11th Street in the Village. That same week, I met a girl tending bar at another cafe in another part of town. She had a similar barcode tattoo, but this one was across the nape of her neck. I mean, this is really sick. I mean, it says, number one, that I'm a member of the herd. I'm robotic, right? But it also says, I don't see myself as a person of value. I see myself as a dead thing, which just happens to be walking around, talking and acting like it's alive temporarily. PMA, Postmortem America, is a society of self-hate. People are more narcissistic. Their delicate ego structures are more fractional and fracturable than ever. Non-theistic loss of God panic. Similar, this is a question I ask myself. Similar to homosexual panic, apply to people who come to the realization they really don't believe in God anymore, or maybe never did in the first place. Can be extremely psychologically scarring for many people. This is why they completely ignore or repress this information from consciousness. That's why when I give talks in public about how nobody believes in God and people say I do, and I use my tests on them, I have clandestine tests. That I trick people, I take them along in a Socratic method one minute they realize that they just admitted they don't believe in God, at which point they usually physically attack me. I've had a guy punch me in the face. This should make you, please love me nihilism. This should make you like/love me. Statements today, values, morals, opinions, etc. They are not truth, meaning they are not how people really feel. subtext to every utterance or behavior. This should make you like me. And this is what political correctness is about. It's like, I speak within the box of political correctness, so I won't hurt your feelings by, Mr. Black guy out there, or Mr. Homosexual out there. Not because I give a shit about you, but because I want you to like me. I want to create an image to the world and reinforce my image of myself that I am a moral person, I'm one of the good folk, I'm moral and care about people, and it's bullshit. They usually don't, or they wouldn't be such... And whenever I hear people say love is all you need, I know right away they've got very little love in them. Loss of God nihilism has produced outright psychosis in the American populace. Laymen misunderstood that there are temporary psychotic states. Laymen misunderstand that there are temporary psychotic states and partial psychotic states. People in the throes of psychotic states aren't necessarily drooling and babbling wastoids. Often the reality testing of peoples and societies can go in and out of focus. That's one of the terms they use in psychiatry to define psychotic people. How well their reality testing is. Self-deception always involves psychotic states of some kind or vice versa, or both. Post-mortem Americans are the most self-deceiving populace, at least since the early Middle Ages. This includes eras of witch hunting of the Middle Ages and the Spanish Inquisition. Excuse me. Please love me nihilism, another one of my terms, and contemporary liberalism. Nihilism exposes the weakness of the weak. The weak are the herd, and which is everybody in this country. This exposure enhances their desperation to belong, to be accepted by others in general and by the rest of the herd itself. This causes members of the herd to pervert or distort the presentation of an already pseudo-identity, because loss of God psychosis has produced, another one of the things it's produced in society is, identity diffusion and confusion. And that's why people are wearing the identity that they want you to believe is theirs on themselves outside, like the piercings and purple hair and all this retarded nonsense. This causes members of the herd to pervert or distort the presentation of an already pseudo-identity to make it more acceptable to the others. This is where some of the rage and hatred of college students, left-wingers, liberals, feminists, homosexuals, and such like comes from. This is its psychodynamic source. They hate whomever the group says to hate so that the group will love and accept them. Ironic. It's ironic. They have to hate in order to get love. This is how the personality that is cult vulnerable, another term of mine, develops. Flo Conway and Jim Siegelman referred to the development of this cult vulnerable personality type as snapping. We no longer have any snapping today because everybody in this country has snapped a long time ago. We are in a post-snapping society at this time. This is the book that they published in the late 70s called Snapping, which is a term that they created to refer to people who are so lost that they're on the verge of joining a religious cult, and then they finally snap and do join the cult. Liberalism is no longer a political agenda. It is an outright bona fide religious cult. It's nihilism. And the people in it have substituted all these equality of rights and all this concern for humanity. They've deluded themselves into believing that that's morality, since they've lost God in morality beforehand. Liberalism is no longer a political agenda. It is an outright bona fide religious cult. Left-wing loonism and its followers are as irrational and as intolerant of questioning, alternative viewpoints, or criticism as any of the most hilarious religious cults who have emerged in the last 50 years, including the Moonies, Hare Krishnas, Heaven's Gate, People's Temple, the Bhagwan, Shinrikyo, or any others you could name. The problem is the majority of the people in this country follow this cult and have no idea that they have swapped this cult for the God of Judeo-Christianity. The left-wing loonism that please love me nihilism and loss of God, trauma, and psychosis has produced is this delusionary thinking. Like, they're going on and on about Medicare for all. I mean, Medicare for all is like $99 trillion. It's insanity. And they, through rationalization, they pretend to believe it's possible. All they care about is looking like they're nice people. That's all they care about. So they will trumpet all of these nonsensical ideas because it makes them look like they're nice and good. American lostness displayed as flippancy and shallowness. American lostness often displays itself as flippancy and shallowness. Are poses of aloofness. This is another term. They are a defense. People afraid, by defense I mean psychological ego defense. People afraid of noticing themselves or seeing themselves. The herd's terror of self-discovery. They are afraid they may stumble upon knowledge of themselves. They are afraid they may accidentally stumble upon a glimpse of themselves and who they are in actuality. The flippancy and shallowness and fluffiness of their personalities helps them in hiding from depressive feelings, which the country is full of depressed people, hiding from feelings of emptiness and worthlessness, which all come from loss of God, suppressing their inner void, fleeing from slave ache, the primary mental ailment of herd membership. Nihilism produces obliviousness and other symptoms. Obliviousness is a term I created, and it's related to fluffiness and shallowness and flippancy, right? Because they train themselves to, They train themselves to ignore and rationalize away their real feelings, right? This is why left-wing people are so, they use intellectual tropes rather than coming from their feeling world because they have out of touch and alienated from their own feeling world. So with intellectual espousings, they can just repeat what other people in the herd have been saying. This is what I call, they have another term, they have repetition orifices, or cliche repetition orifices. Obliviousness is a deeper form of distraction device. It's a psychological defense mechanism against self-disgust in the Hellerian sense. Decadence directs post-mortem America. Not a flavor of ice cream, but a seriously destructive force in post-mortem American society. Not all overindulgence is decadence. Sometimes you're dealing with a drive for excellence or superiority. Here is my parable of the royal baker. The parable of the royal baker. The royal baker invents new cakes and pies and pastries to one end for one purpose, to please the palate of the king. If he succeeds, he passes on his new recipes to the other bakers throughout the Commonwealth, and they expand upon them with their own personal ideas. As for the king, if he's a real king, he's not interested in having his palate pleased. He's not interested in his own pleasure or pleasure in general. His interest is that his royal bakers and all the kingdom's other bakers are as brilliant as possible at what they do. He wants the kingdom's bakers and everyone else in the kingdom to strive for the highest degree of excellence in everything they do, regardless of what it is. And he does this for no other reason than for the pursuit of excellence itself. Can you imagine that? Art for art's sake? The pursuit of trying to be excellent, trying to really be the best you can be, not this fake best you can be bullshit that you see on the internet. Art for art's sake and the pursuit of excellence for the pursuit of excellence's sake. He wants everybody in his kingdom, and ultimately everybody in the world if possible, to strive for excellence in whatever they do. The pursuit of excellence is its own reward. Weird, huh? It's weird to people today because our society privileges the exact opposite of pursuit of excellence. Everything in America is about distractions and obfuscatory tactics. That's another one of my terms, obfuscatory tactics. Finding ways to distract oneself from oneself. Finding ways to distract oneself from loss of God, loss of religion, loss of morality, and the stark fear these losses inspire in people's breasts. Dostoevsky/Kierkegaard. If God doesn't exist, everything is permitted. So, to the individual, quote unquote, herd member, he imagines subconsciously that without God and the morality that comes from God, individuals, groups, governments are free to do to him what they will, and he has no argument against it. In the past, it would have been, this is not right. God doesn't like this. And people would take that seriously. Since they don't take God seriously anymore, they don't take God's wrath seriously anymore. Everything Americans do is pinball, ultimately. Narcotics against self-disgust, distraction devices, skateboarding, computer games, poker tournaments, tattoos, pinball, relationships. People are punishing themselves in this society for their own lack of ability to believe in anything. Values decay and disintegration. Religious values, political values, aesthetic values, most of all moral values are disintegrating. People don't pass away, they die. People are no longer, because of the loss of God, people are no longer able to deal with death to the extreme that they cannot even speak the words death or die. Because of loss of God nihilism and the resulting loss of God panic and loss of God psychosis, people cannot deal with death as they have in the past with the assistance of comforting religious myths and rituals. People today are so loaded with hilarious nihilism they cannot even speak the words death or die. They don't say, oh, he died last year, I'm sorry to inform you. They say, he passed away or he passed on. When I hear people talk like that, it scares me. And so we have new phenomena such as spontaneous memorials springing up everywhere in the country. More discussion of that below. You know, these spontaneous memorials is like this, if somebody dies in a car crash on the freeway, dozens of people come and they put teddy bears and candles and little signs and all this kind of stuff. In the past, they went to church and dealt with it that way. It's all just pinball. My little brother thinks he plays poker in big poker tournaments. You just think you play poker. What you're playing is pinball. You're playing pinball like everybody else in America. It's all pinball. Everything is pinball. Americans are cartoon character fluff personalities. That's part of the flippancy and obliviousness. Humanism means that man's reason is sufficient to reveal himself, to others, and the universe to himself. Page 27 from Wesley Barnes' excellent book, Existentialism. I took classes with Wesley Barnes when I was in graduate school at the University of Colorado. Pretty cool. We can see today that no one is capable of seeing himself as he actually is, nor capable of revealing himself to himself, or comprehending any revelation about himself from others. Americans walk around today with cartoon character fluff personalities. That's what the dyed hair is all about. The fluff is there to say, I am empty, I'm not doing anything harmful, please don't harm me, emotionally or physically. Just to give one preliminary example from the dozens and hundreds I will reveal in my books and writings. Societal thanatos. It is my contention that this society, as a building block of Western civilization, and alongside its other building blocks, is driven by a collective political unconscious, in pursuit of suicidal self-destruction. Societal suicide is due to societal crisis and/or societal collapse. Much more ominous, our civilization and our society as a building block and as an avant-garde of that civilization. This society is a building block of Western civilization. I mean, the United States didn't create the Enlightenment, it was created by the Enlightenment. But through world wars and decadence and all the things that have happened in Europe, they started to follow a lot of our political values. So we really, the United States really is the building block of modern civilization. And it's understandable why, because the Industrial Revolution, which is everything, was started in Great Britain, Germany, and the United States simultaneously. This society as a building block of Western civilization, collective political unconscious, society-wide civilization encompassing, in pursuit of societal self-destruction, a fundamental project of self-annihilation. Narcissism and the resultant growth of homosexuality is part of the larger society. Civilization encompassing the larger society-wide civilization encompassing drive towards self-destruction, groping blindly towards societal suicide, stumbling towards societal suicide, in the grips of a long-term, dedicated, and very determined program of collective suicide. Destruction of each individual through species destruction through world destruction. I believe that the oil spills and global warming and all these things are subconsciously done purposely to destroy the planet and thereby destroy themselves. Intensely determined program of societal suicide. I have discovered a civilization-wide conspiracy, one more ominous step or stage in the overall program of societal suicide. I repeat these things because these are just, these PowerPoints are for my presentation to show people a glimpse of my ideas. So don't expect it to be, edited and punctuated correctly. Epidemic homosexuality, arrow. Epidemic narcissism, arrow. Epidemic decadence. Has more ominous signs and connections. Part of a larger society-wide civilization encompassing drive towards self-destruction. Our suicidal purpose. Our civilization is in the grip of a very real and direct suicidal purpose. Each individual member of the herd in our society is assisting in their own little way to help the human race commit suicide. Our societal collapse. Our societal collapse, evident in our epidemic of narcissism and in our epidemic of homosexuality, is the result of the divestiture of meaning everywhere. The absurd in the modern world, in the 20th century, in the postmodern world. No longer believe in God, no longer believe in heaven, nihilism. You're no longer, you have no meaning anymore. You have no purpose. We are experiencing a divestiture of meaning overall in our society. Systematically, our society is making everything meaningless that once had meaning. This is part of our values vacuum. For example, wedding dresses. Virgin white purity wedding gown, which she's been, it's like women get married to their fiancé or boyfriend who they've been living with and fucking for years, but they still wear a white wedding dress. Now marriage itself, it no longer has any meaning. And that's true in multiple senses. It's all mere nihilism. Dishonest morality of weakness. Dishonest morality of weakness fueled morality of self-pity, which in turn fueled the morality of victimhood, which in turn caused morality of blame and accusation. Okay? All of the softening and weakening, what I call Eloyism, and creeping Eloyism and Telosianism, which the two quotes earlier in this PowerPoint presentation, where he talks about people getting so weak they can't tolerate normal pain or suffering anymore. The meek shall inherit the earth, the strong shall inherit the universe. Author unknown, quoted from a science magazine approximately 1970. I saw this in a magazine about science. I don't know where, I don't know who wrote it, but it's a quote I never forgot. American lostness has produced American bullshit. Like everything people speak, especially on the left. All the left-wing bullshit, all the railing against Trump is all the result of American lostness, which is the result of loss of God. Lostness, quote-unquote, another of my new terms, is a religious concept. Lostness is not a political concept, exactly. Lostness is not a moral concept or even a psychological concept. Lostness is primarily a religious concept. There are a lot of people who are mentally ill, who are experiencing lostness. They wander around with no purpose in life. They sleep their lives away, they're depressed, whatever. American lostness, the Who, We're Not Going to Take It lyrics. Pete Townshend's commentary on Your American Lostness. Well, I read this already in a previous slide. Welcome to the camp. I guess you all know why we're here. My name is Tommy, and I became aware this year. If you want to follow me, you've got to play pinball and put in your earplugs, put on in your eye shades. You know where to put the cork. See, that's what he's talking about there is related to the obliviousness, the fluffiness, the shallowness of people's personality. They don't want to see themselves. They don't want to see the world as it is, So they go into themselves to the point where they shut off all perception of the external world. Now you can't hear me, your ears are truly sealed. You can't speak either. Your mouth is filled. You can see nothing, and pinball completes the scene. Here comes Uncle Ernie to guide you to your very own machine. We're not going to take it, never did, and never will. Don't want no religion, and as far as we can tell, we ain't going to take you, never did, and never will. We're not going to take you, we forsake you, going to rape you. Let's forget you, better still. American lostness. Their diversions have taken over the preoccupations, and the preoccupations have become occupational. Radiation decay and radiation distribution of related radioactive nihilist phenomena collected to and maybe resulting from post-World War II Hellerian nihilism. Note, please forgive these diagrams. At this point, I cannot figure out how to make the word appear at each point of the geometric shape to make the desired visual impression, but hopefully you get the point. So I tried to make all these geometric shapes to show that all of these phenomena, nihilism, narcissism, alienation, are all feeding each other and perpetuating each other. Nihilists, it starts with nihilism, and then the rest follow immediately. And then they all self-perpetuate. Linguistic nominality. This is scary. My concept of linguistic nominality. First, here's a quote from a great book. You intend to realize the failure of words, yet we both know that it is simply a paradox of expectations you have compared to the existing means of communication. One who cannot communicate within the context of the avowed failure of words is at a loss. The acknowledgement would suggest that the words stating this condition were themselves useless, but this is not the case. We struggle with forms and with the means of communication to better understand them and ourselves. Yet the complacent reader cannot remain so when he is asked consciously to become the medium for understanding. So the complacent reader is perhaps awakened, and the active reader is excited by the structure of the communication before him. If not, the words are decoration for the page. That's from Edwin Schlossberg's Einstein and Beckett. Beckett and Einstein, a record of an imaginary discussion with Albert Einstein and Samuel Beckett. Society and cultural nominality. Nominality, social nominalism, nihilist nominalism, linguistic nominalism, linguistic social nominalism. Airplane peanuts are an example of nominality. When people no longer believe in anything anymore, they experience nihilist dread, and their language experiences nihilist dread as well. They don't want to think to themselves that their words had any meaning, that they don't believe in anything anymore. So they become, not their belief system becomes, nominal good job function becomes nominal. So they become, not their belief system becomes nominal. Good job function becomes nominal. Relationships become nominal. Post-structural ideologies, such as deconstruction and etc., have influenced the ability of words to mean anything at all ever, including the words needed to make arguments about post-ritual linguistic lack of meaning and meaninglessness. That was part of the left-wing plot. If words no longer have any meaning according to them, then only their words can be thought of as having meaning. Linguistic nominality and the values vacuum. There's been a divestiture of meaning everywhere in PMA society. Nothing has meaning for the society anymore. So what's going on is the words themselves have meaning. So when the left talks about they believe in freedom of speech, and then they talk about, but the exception is hate speech, which is anything that they don't like, you know that the concept freedom of speech has lost all its meaning. They've drained it of meaning. Systematically, our society is making everything meaningless that once had meaning. For example, wedding dresses. Brides used to wear virgin white wedding gowns to show that she was pure sexually, meaning she was a virgin. Which back in, when society was still pretty Christianized, was important. Women who remarry after a divorce or widowhood usually do not wear a white wedding gown, or at least they didn't. Today, brides wear white wedding gowns even though they have been living with their fiancé boyfriends and fucking them for years. Now marriage itself no longer has any meaning. It's about nihilism, pure and simple, no pun intended. Social nominalism and linguistic nominality, direct result of total nihilism and PMA. Post-structural and destructive ideologies have influenced the ability of words to mean anything at all ever in the real world, including words needed to make arguments about post-structural linguistic lack of meaning. Deconstruction of language applicable to the ivory tower and dreamers in academia, whose dreams are derived from better worldism and therefore psychotic. See, the left is all about better worldism, and that shows their sickness. Common people on the street have never heard of deconstruction, but it still has seeped down into the soil and is having a real miserable effect. Airplane peanuts are an ominous example in this society today of what I call linguistic nominality. When people no longer believe in anything anymore, they become nihilistic, but they don't want to think of themselves as if they don't believe in anything anymore. So they retain a semblance of the former belief systems, but they become nominal. Their job function becomes nominal, their personal relationships become nominal. I talk about this in the next two sections on No One Believes in God and The Better World is Coming to a Theater Near You. So, a lot of people still go to church, especially in the South and the Midwest, right? But it's my contention that when they worship, they're not really thinking themselves, feeling that they're communicating with God because they don't really believe that God is out there listening to them. So what do they go for? Well, they go for picnics, they go for church events, they go for socializing, etc., etc. Words become placeholders, and my people, the Jews, they just do it out of several thousand years of ignorant habit. Words become placeholders for the ideas they used to represent. The airlines serve you a tiny bag of peanuts, and then they can say they fed their passengers. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Steven Spielberg, 1977. Hold on a minute. I have to italicize this because it is the title of a movie. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, directed by Steven Spielberg, released 1977. This is a scary, bizarre film from the point of view of those who are aware of the death of God. There's an air of religious worship when the spaceship lands, like we would worship a god coming down to Earth to meet us. Roswell, the fascination with UFOs and aliens, the way they might demand an answer from God. This is another sick, perverted, delusional kind of substitute for God. People become interested in aliens, UFOs, because they have to believe that something is out there, since they no longer believe that God is out there, wherever out there is. Viewing the movie helps people deal with their God loss because they express worship that they would have had for God toward the benign, friendly, but superior aliens. It would be fun to make a sequel where we find out that the aliens were just pretending to be friendly, and we see what happens to the humans who sail away with the aliens in their spaceship and find out that those people are surgically experimented upon and left to die in torturous agony. That would be hilarious. The Somersault of Self-Annihilations, Robert Crumb's History of America in Pictures. And, this is famous from the 60s. Robert Crumb was the most famous political cartoonist in the 60s. And he was hilarious. And he shows a series of pictures. There's 300 years ago in America, there's a green meadow with birds and trees. Suddenly, there's a train running through it. Then, in the next frame, there is telephone wire, a road, a house. Then there's a house, picket fence, road, other houses. Then other houses, other roads, other vehicles, and on, until you see the typical urban blight mess of wires everywhere, and filth, and cars all over the place, and the insanity of our society. Life is strife, and that's the way it should and must be. Weak people, who are further weakened by Hilarion nihilism, are too weak to subsist with strife. That's what the paragraph is talking about immediately. They arm themselves for a war against life's natural strife. This mindset evolves into better worldism. There is no such thing as religious conversion. People today don't believe in religion. People today don't even believe in the religion they're born into. My sister thinks she's a pagan. My kid's sister thinks she's a pagan. She thinks she converted to paganism some years back. She and some of her friends, who are also converted pagans, go out into the woods and worship the trees. You don't just get up one day and say, I'm going to convert to another religion today. You cannot convert to any religion, really. That's just not the way things work. In order to believe in a religion at all, you have to be raised in it from day one. It has to be ingrained in every fiber of your being from before the times you have any memory of it. Obfuscatory tactics. Facebook comment reaction to Chris Hernandez's whining about today's bombings in Brazil. This was written a couple of years ago when there was a terrorist bombing in Brussels. They asked for it and they got it. Several decades ago, Europe decided world wars had exhausted their civilization and that the solution for their exhaustion was to delete their civilization from world history by importing millions of specimens/organisms from other failed civilizations. Now the long, slowly, like failed states. Now the long, slow process of their final suicide has begun. My question is, how long will this process of self-destruction take? And how long will it take the U.S. to follow suit? Goodbye Bach, goodbye Leonardo, goodbye to Greek temples and Gothic cathedrals, goodbye Goethe and Hölderlin and Kafka and Fellini and Freud and Planck and Fermat, and goodbye Beatles. What we are witnessing is what Eric Keller has termed the somersault of our own self-annihilation. I don't know why you Americans are whining about it. You're part of it. Your turn will come soon. Public schools have been perpetuating endless American bullshit. Here's some of the American bullshit we see in postmodern America today. Number one, people cannot change their sex. This idea is psychotic. Number two, equality means equality before the law and equality of opportunity, not equality of outcomes. What you do with your freedom and equality is your concern and your failure if you fail. It's not about racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, or whatever other lies people want to tell themselves. American teachers have not been teaching our students that people are equal. They have been trying to indoctrinate them to the idea that people are the same. All conformist people are the same, not all other people. Teachers in schools have been selling kids this muck for at least 40 years now. I watched it happen. I actually spent a year in a teacher's college before I went back to graduate school. You have to be willing to fight and struggle and sacrifice to achieve anything in life, which means people must focus on criticizing themselves and others. Self-critique, rather than narcissistically catering to their tender feelings and reinforcing their delusions. This is the garbage that teachers have been teaching. They should go to prison for a few years for this betrayal. 6. People cannot change their sex. They are born either male, female, or indeterminate, which used to be called hermaphrodite. But now they are trying to create new fake concepts of gender. Hermaphrodites always have more of one sex organ. If any sex organ is operational at all, the other one is not. But now they are trying to create new fake concepts of gender, which are destructive of human relationships and other things, pretending this is progress, and teachers have been enabling this insanity. 7. Inversion, in other words, homosexuality, is not natural, normal, healthy, or good. It is a sexual pathology. Even Camille Paglia recognizes this. Homosexuals have a serious psychological problem that can be helped. Teachers and others in society have been suppressing knowledge or publicity about successful therapies for homosexuality for no other reason than protecting people from their narcissistic delicacies. 8. What I call Negroism or Blackism. Negroism, what I call Negroism or Blackism, sympathy for African Americans because of their history, because of what was done to them, nothing was done to them really, and their status in society, has done them nothing but harm. This attitude has helped blacks to avoid solving their problems, which are problems and not ours. When you give people a prefabricated excuse for their failures, they will fail. It's irrelevant whether or not they were treated justly or unjustly. To Kill a Mockingbird is not a great novel or work of importance literarily or socially. It is a facile melodrama being used as propaganda to further the ends of Negroism and Blackism. Okay? I define Negroism technically, this is my term, as the belief in this country that we should give black people special treatment and special privileges because they're inferior. And I've said, this is not to say, I'm not saying they're inferior. I'm saying that everyone out there, that you, the people who want to give blacks special treatment, quotas to get into schools, to get jobs, whatever, quotas, these people are saying, I believe black people are inferior. Whether or not they are, belief and reality are two different things. Belief is a feeling or opinion you have inside yourself. Reality is the reality that every healthy, psychologically healthy person can see. There's two things that I've noticed in Black America in the last few decades that made me think this way. One was the Million Man March, and another was what is his name? The black film director who directed Do the Right Thing. Okay. In the Million Man March and Do the Right Thing, the movie, there was a theme that was being presented. Okay. And it was a wishy-washy, mixed-up theme. In the Million Man March, the initial purpose was to say, look, we're black, was to be like Candace Owens and Turning Point USA, where we've blown up the concept of victimism, which I call religion victimism. Okay? So in the Million Man March, initially what they were saying is that we're black people, we failed, we caused our own problems, we're poor because of our own inabilities, we're blaming it on people, we commit crimes, we got to do something to change. But few people in Black America or among hunky liberals in America could handle this honesty. So they went back and forth saying that it's us, no, it's them. No, it's us, no, it's them. Do the Right Thing had a similar problem. Back and forth, right? Who's doing the right thing in the movie? Nobody does the right thing. The closest you have to the right thing is Sal. He loves his pizzeria, which he built with his own hands. He keeps it in Bensonhurst over decades when it went from normal white to black ghetto. And he feeds people. He feels himself part of the community. He gives money to the mayor of the street or whatever it is. He loves the fact that these people are growing up on his food. He's friendly with the black girl down the street who he kind of has the hots for. But he doesn't do the right thing either. So the Million Man March and the movie Do the Right Thing and other of this, what the hell is his name? I can't remember his name. I'm getting old. My memory's going. Do the Right Thing by... Anyway. Today's Sodom and Gomorrah is less wicked than it is mediocre. God wouldn't save Sodom and Gomorrah from destruction to spare the lives of 10 righteous men from among multitude of the wicked there. Today's earth/humans have a much worse mess. Irony is that it's not just wickedness that merits their destruction, but mediocrity. At least if there were more wicked ones, they would be interesting enough to save. In post-mortem America, everything is a racket and everyone is a racketeer. Thank you for listening. Well, that's enough.